Hey everybody, Ramadan Mubarak. I'm happy to be here today as a guest for Miss Amina. It was awesome being able to get up today, get out of the house. I showered for you guys and everything, which is pretty cool. I might sneeze a little bit today because my allergies are starting to hit me pretty bad, so I get pretty puffy around the eyes and stuff like that. But enough about me. We're here today to just kind of talk a little bit more about the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I went through your chapter on it. I'm going to be more specifically looking at pages 105 to I think it was 115, but I'll be bringing some of that other stuff in today too. So biggest thing with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms is that what we need to know is really 105 to 115, basically, if I had to break it down for you guys, it's telling you that a law is not constitutional if it breaks the charter, okay? So we're all given different rights and freedoms, our freedom of mobility, freedom of religion, freedom of language, freedom of speech. There's FNMI rights and freedoms, age, our gender, that type of thing. All of that is protected by our rights and freedoms, okay? If a law, what we say is contravenes or does not agree with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the law is no good. And for some of you guys, when we were talking about some of the different things that are the different roles of our government, I told you guys, some of you who I had worked with, that the Senate, one of their main goals was to take a look and see, does this contravene the rights and freedoms of Canadian citizens? And again, basically, our court systems, especially the Supreme Court, that's basically what they do. They look at cases where somebody says, hey, my rights and freedoms were completely ignored here. So then they go to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court makes a ruling and they say yes or no, that your rights and freedoms were tampered with. We're not quite as absolute as in some other areas of the world, like the US. Their constitution tends to be a little bit more black and white. They do still have some of these issues, but we'll see a little bit later that Canada has actually a couple clauses in our rights and freedoms that don't make our freedoms always as absolute as you would think or sometimes hope. But sometimes they're in there for a good reason, and we'll talk about that too. So first off, in your textbook, which I'm not going to talk too much about those cases, you guys have read them, but I just want to share some stuff with you guys. I totally remember back one of the first big cases that your textbook talks about where the Charter of Rights and Freedoms of a citizen had been violated, and that was with the Sunday shopping. So when I was growing up, no stores were open on Sundays. It was normal, totally normal. It would have seemed weird to have a store that was open on Sundays. Now, I believe, and it's been so long now that I don't remember exactly, but I think some of the essential services were open on Sunday, but it was pretty rare to see something open. Stores, for the most part, weren't open. It was kind of like COVID. right now, where a lot of those things that we take for granted that are open weren't open. I do recall that grocery stores weren't open on Sunday, so you had to make sure that you had everything on Saturdays, all that type of stuff. Now, back in 1985 or 84, I guess it was, 83, 84, a convenience store, a drugstore down in Calgary stayed open on a Sunday. They were fined. And they said, hey, it's my right to be open. So they went to court. This Sunday shopping law had been in place mainly from kind of a push through Christianity that wanted everything kind of closed on Sundays for the holy day of Christians, right? So, but as we know, not everybody is a Christian. It doesn't really affect everybody. If they're going to close on Sundays, well, maybe we should be closed on Fridays for the Muslims. Maybe we should be closed on Saturdays for Jewish people, or for some different Christian religions, also celebrate their holy day on Saturday. So basically, he went to the court, and it was upheld that this guy should be able to open his store on Sunday. We can't force somebody's religious beliefs and ideas on somebody else through this shopping ban that they did have on Sunday. So that was kind of one of the first big tests. Another one that we take a look at in the textbook that I do remember as well was from a university professor over at the U of A who was being forced to retire. Mandatory retirement ages are something that are in place sometimes, and this lady was being forced to retire even though she didn't want to. Now, our Charter of Rights and Freedoms says that if you're 65, that doesn't matter how old you are, what age you are protected, you have rights and you have freedoms. So she took that as meaning, hey, I have the right still to work. You can't force me out of this job just because I'm 65 now. Well, she took it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court at that time said, you know what, sorry, but you took that job with the understanding that there was a mandatory retirement age. So they actually said, you know what, sorry, but you're out of luck here. Now, and it was because of that clause that was written into her contract that had said 65 and over, we don't want you anymore, well, you have to retire. So some of those mandatory ages still are in place. I know my father-in-law, who was a judge, he had a mandatory retirement age. They actually asked him to work past his because they were short on judges at the time. So they had asked a few people to step up and continue working. So as we see, some of these things aren't always totally absolute. Now, I want to talk to you guys a little bit about my situation. So when I first started looking for a teaching job, I was out there looking in the public system because, you know, that was what I knew, and I also knew that I couldn't get in with the Catholic system. Okay, the Catholic system has or did have. I hear that they've loosened this up a little bit over the last few years, but they have in place where they would basically only hire Catholic people. Okay, now I could look at that and say, well, my rights and freedoms are being infringed on, but it was due to the religious background that, hey, we wanted a certain person who represents our faith and all that type of stuff in our system. So even though my right to get a job was kind of being a little bit infringed upon, their right superseded mine, and I have no problem with that. They were doing what they needed to do and that they felt was right. So I was surprised when a friend of mine said, hey Curtis, why don't you go try and apply over at the Edmonton Islamic Academy? My kids go there, it's a great school, blah, 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 blah. I'm sure I told so many of you this before. And my first response was, well, I'm not Muslim, I probably, I'm not gonna waste my time, they aren't gonna look at me. And he said, no, it's not the case there. So the school here, they've taken a different approach than what the Catholic system did. And they said, you know what, we're just looking for teachers. We don't care about your background, we care about your character, obviously, but we don't really care if you're Muslim or not. Can you teach? Are you willing to come in and do your job and embrace what's going on here? And of course, that's something that I was definitely wanted to do, and that's how I ended up here at the school. So Charter of Rights and Freedoms, we all have them, right? We all have these different rights. So what does this mean for you guys as students? One of the biggest cases that's come up for students was when they took a look at locker searches, okay? And I know that this year that there were a few locker searches that did take place, and you guys could say, well, what about my rights? I should be protected against different things like search and seizure, Okay, that's one of the ones that is in place. And as students, you know, that was a concern that some students had in the past. Now, this had all stemmed from locker searches for drugs for a kid who they suspected of having marijuana. So that they used to get the cops in there with their dogs and just do random searches every once in a while, and lo and behold, they ended up catching this kid who had marijuana in his locker, and he said, well, my rights were infringed upon. There was no warrant or anything for this search. They took it to the Supreme Court, actually, and over there they said, well, if we suspect that there is something going on in your locker, we can search it. So for you guys, what this means is, yeah, we can do those locker searches for the cell phones and that type of thing. Again, you guys have also signed different things that said, hey, we aren't going to bring our cell phones to school and blah, 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 blah. Although that's totally flipped 180 here, and now we're doing everything technologically and off of phones and computers and stuff like that. So it just depends on the circumstances. But for you guys, again, what that basically means is that yes, even though you do have your rights, at certain times other things will supersede those rights. So again, if we have some suspicion that there's something going on, we can take a look into your lockers and stuff like that. Not that we would want to do that daily or anything like that, but it is something that is allowed. Two other things. I said earlier on that for the most part we have these rights and freedoms that nobody can really touch. Our laws have to follow and these rights and freedoms and allow you to have these rights and freedoms. If not, the law is unconstitutional. Well, what the Canadian government did when they set up our Charter of Rights and Freedoms is they put two different little clauses in there that kind of gets the government out of having to grant you all these rights and freedoms. Now, they try to use them quite cautiously, and rightfully so, because if they started just implementing these all the time, our rights and freedoms wouldn't be worth anything. And as we know, that we're a free country, and I think that we do a pretty good job here of upholding people's rights and freedoms. So some examples of when they have put limitations. That's our first one. It's called limitations on a law. Anti-terrorism laws sometimes will be passed with limitations, knowing that certain rights that individuals have will be, we're going to be crossing that line, and we're going to be taking away some of those rights. But they look at it from a protective good of society. So if we need to pass a law that contravenes some of these rights of individuals in order to protect society, they're going to go ahead and do it, but they do it cautiously. Some other stuff that's going on, obviously, right now is they're passing all sorts of stuff, as you see in the news, about gatherings of people and all that type of stuff. We can't have more than 15 people together, and we want social distancing. There's been people who have been fined and stuff for gathering in large groups, and what they're doing now, they're saying it's for the good of everybody to limit your right to basically gather with other people at this time, for the protection of everybody, for the good of society. Now, I know I've been stuck at home and it's boring at times, right? With the good weather now, I was outside the other day cleaning up the yard, hopefully get to spend a little bit more yard time coming up, but normally a big chunk of time without working, I'd be like, yeah, let's go on vacation, that type of thing. But there's really some really strong restrictions right now on our mobility rights, but it is for the good of society. And I totally agree with what they're doing. We need to do this right now to stop what's happening with the spread of COVID. I know for a lot of people it wouldn't be serious for us to catch it, but for a lot of people it really is. So right now I'm more than happy. I'm bored. I'm going through Netflix like crazy. I'm almost out of Netflix, Amazon Plus, and Crave, and all that kind of stuff. I've just been binging on shows, but really, and I'm gonna run out soon. But really, it is for everybody's good. The other time that they can limit rights is they've given the provinces the right to also contravene these rights and freedoms. Okay. Now, when we look at it, there's a couple of different cases where or a couple different times where this has been kind of more prevalent. So it's called the notwithstanding clause. And again, it just says that the governments of the provinces will say, hey, we're making a provincial law here. We know that it contravenes, it goes against the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, but we still think it's important enough for citizens of our province that we're going to push this through. Okay. Again, it doesn't get used a lot. The two probably most, I'd say probably two of the more well-known cases of this have come out of Quebec. Back in the 80s, I believe it was around 88 or something like that, Quebec passed a French language law that said that we need to that in Quebec you could only put up signs on your storefronts and stuff that were in the French language. Of course, based on our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, that shouldn't be allowed. French, English shouldn't matter. You should be able to put up whatever you want for your for the language for your signs. But in Quebec, for protection of the French language, they decided to go ahead and say, notwithstanding, we're gonna make this law that says we can only post French language signs on storefronts. Okay, that created a little bit of controversy at the time, but it went through. More recently, one of the biggest ones that's come up, I'm sure a lot of us know about, has been when they were passing the law on face coverings. Okay, ironically, which they're telling us all now to wear masks and stuff like that, again to help spread the spread of the COVID. So it's all good. But what they were really doing was saying, hey, you can't cover your face in public and blah 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 blah. They tried to word it in such a way that it seemed like it was not a big deal. And actually what the wording was to have non-religious symbolism on uniforms and stuff like that. But really what they were trying to do was get rid of the niqab. And everybody knows it, or that is kind of what everybody has kind of presumed was happening in that case. But again, they went with that notwithstanding clause. So two big cases out of Quebec where they did use that notwithstanding. It's been used in Alberta, it's been used in Saskatchewan, it's been used in Ontario. So it's not like Quebec is the only province that has ever used the notwithstanding, but they probably have two of the more prominent cases of it. So again, to wrap up what I was here to talk to you guys about today, really simply, if a law basically takes away one of your rights and freedoms that's in the charter, that law it's unconstitutional. It can't go forward. We can take it to court. You can say, hey, my charter rights were being violated here, and you'll take it to the court and they will take a look at it and throw out either your case or evidence that they've gathered illegally in a way that contravenes your rights and freedoms. Okay, with the exception of limitations. Again, the government may say, hey, there's limitations on this law, such as what we're seeing right now with some of these COVID laws that are being passed. And then the notwithstanding, where a province can say, hey, we know that your charter rights and freedoms have been violent. We are going to be breaking the Charter of Rights and Freedoms here, but we're going ahead with this law anyways. It's for the good of the citizens of our province, okay? So basically, guys, that's pages 105 to 115 in a nutshell. If you can remember one thing from it, just remember any law that basically violates those charters of rights and freedoms, it's unconstitutional, okay? Have a good one, guys. Good seeing you, sort of. Good talking to you, sort of. But we'll see you again, hopefully, inshallah, in fall when everything hopefully gets back to normal. Take care for now. We'll see you later.